Moonlight filtered through the ancient oaks, casting silver shadows across Sequa's trembling hands as she traced the worn edges of the contract. The yellowed parchment, heavy with the weight of generations, bore the names of countless arranged matches before her. Tonight, under the harvest moon's watchful eye, her name would join theirs. The sacred grove, nestled deep within the Blackfoot Mountains, hummed with ancient power that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. She inhaled deeply, drawing in the rich scent of pine needles and sage that perfumed the cool autumn air. Around her, members of both packs gathered in a solemn circle, their faces illuminated by flickering torchlight. The storm chasers stood, to the west, their dark clothing blending with the shadows, while her own people, the moon dancers, gathered to the east, adorned in traditional white ceremonial robes embroidered with silver threads. "The time has come." Elder Makia's weathered voice cut through the silence of the sacred grove. The old woman's silver hair gleamed in the moonlight as she stepped forward, her wooden staff tapping against ancient stones. "The moon goddess demands balance, and the contract must be honored." Sequa lifted her chin, meeting the elder's stern gaze. At 25, she had hoped to escape the ancient tradition that had bound shifter families for centuries. Her fingers unconsciously traced the crescent moon birthmark on her wrist, the mark that had sealed her fate from birth. As the last female born to the moon dancer's alpha line, she knew this day would come, but understanding didn't make acceptance any easier. The weight of her mother's absence pressed heavily upon her heart. Helena Moon Dancer had disappeared 5 years ago, leaving behind only a cryptic note and a silver pendant that Sequa now wore around her neck. The pendant seemed to grow warmer against her skin as the ceremony approached, as if responding to the ancient magic gathering in the grove. "Nodin approaches," someone whispered from the gathering crowd, their voice carrying a mix of awe and apprehension. The air shifted, carrying the scent of pine and wilderness. Through the mist emerged a tall figure, his broad shoulders rigid with purpose. Nodin Thunderwolf moved with the quiet grace of his animal form, each step deliberate and controlled. His dark eyes, when they met Sequa's, held neither warmth nor rejection, only resignation. He wore the traditional ceremonial attire of the storm chasers, black leather adorned with lightning bolt patterns worked in silver thread, marking him as their future alpha. "I accept the terms of the contract," his deep voice resonated through the clearing, the traditional words falling like stones into still water. The power in his voice made several younger wolves lower their heads instinctively. Elder Makia nodded approvingly, her ancient eyes holding secrets Sequa couldn't begin to decipher. The ancient pact between the storm chasers and the moon. "Dancers must continue. Your union will ensure the balance of power among the shifter clans of these lands." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled packs. "For centuries our peoples have maintained peace through these sacred bonds. The moon goddess herself blessed this tradition in the time of the first shift." Sequa felt the weight of history pressing down upon her shoulders. The stories of the first shift had been passed down through generations, tales of how their ancestors first learned to change form under the guidance of the moon goddess. The contract marriages had begun soon after, a way to prevent the bloodshed that had nearly destroyed both packs in those early days. But as Sequa stepped forward to complete the ritual, a haunting howl pierced the night. The assembly froze, recognition flickering across their faces. That howl belonged to neither Storm Chaser nor Moon Dancer. It carried a different signature, one that sent chills down Sequa's spine. "Rogue wolves," Nodin growled, his form already shimmering with the promise of change. The air around him crackled with suppressed power, his control evident in the way he held his wolf at bay. "Wait!" Sequa grabbed his arm, surprising herself with her boldness. The instant their skin touched, an electric current seemed to pass between them, making them both step back in shock. "There's something else. That howl. It sounds like Tasunka," Elder Makia whispered, fear creeping into her usually steady voice. Her staff clattered against the stone circle as her hand trembled. "But that's impossible. He's been dead for 20 years. The name sent ripples of unease through both packs. Sequa had heard whispers of Tasunka throughout her childhood, the powerful alpha who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances 2 decades ago. Some said he had gone rogue, others claimed he had been murdered, but no one spoke of him openly, especially not during ceremonies. The moon disappeared behind heavy clouds, plunging the grove into darkness. In that moment, Sekwa felt the weight of unspoken secrets pressing down upon them all. The contract in her hand seemed to pulse with its own energy, and somewhere in the distance, that impossible howl echoed once more. "The ceremony must continue," Elder Makia insisted, but her voice wavered. She raised her staff, the crystals embedded in its crown glowing with an inner light. The ancient magic cannot be interrupted. Nodin's eyes met Sekwa's again, and this time she saw something flicker in their depths. Recognition, perhaps, of a shared destiny far more complex than either had imagined. His hand found hers, warm and steady despite the tension in his shoulders. "We proceed," he said firmly, though his gaze darted to the tree line where shadows seemed to move with purpose. "But after this, we need to talk. There are things about your family, about Tasunka, that you need to know." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of change and danger. Leaves swirled around the sacred circle, and the torches flickered wildly. Sekwa's pendant grew hot against her skin, almost burning, as if trying to warn her of something she couldn't yet understand. As she placed her hand in Nodin's to complete the binding ritual, she couldn't shake the feeling that this contract was more than just an arranged marriage. It was the key to unlocking secrets that had been buried beneath decades of silence and shame. Questions burned in her mind. What really happened to Tasunka? Why had her mother disappeared? And why did she feel as if she were stepping into a trap that had been set long before her birth? The moon emerged once more, casting its silver light upon the ancient parchment as their blood mingled upon its surface. The contract was sealed with ancient words of power, binding not just their futures, but their very souls. As the magic settled around them like a heavy cloak, Sekwa caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the grove, a massive white wolf with eyes that seemed to glow with an inner fire. But when she blinked, it was gone, leaving her to wonder if it had been real or merely a shadow of things to come. Dawn broke over the Blackfoot Mountains, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold. Sekwa stood at the window of her new home, a modernized log cabin on the outskirts of Stormchaser territory. The events of the previous night felt like a surreal dream, but the weight of the silver band on her left ring finger was an undeniable reminder of her new reality. She traced the intricate pattern etched into the metal, a crescent moon intertwined with a lightning bolt, the symbol of her union with Nodin, a marriage arranged by ancient magic and tribal politics. A union that felt more like a prison sentence than a partnership. "You're up early." Nodin's deep voice startled her from her reverie. He stood in the doorway, his muscular frame silhouetted against the morning light. Despite the circumstances, Sekwa couldn't help but admire his rugged features and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, turning back to the window. "Too many questions." Nodin moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat emanating from his body. "I promised you answers," he said softly. "But first, we need to meet with the elders. There's more at stake here than just our marriage." Sekwa nodded, steeling herself for what was to come. As they made their way to the pack's central meeting hall, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin. The meeting hall was an imposing structure of stone and timber, its walls adorned with intricate carvings depicting the history of both packs. Elders from the Storm Chasers and Moon Dancers sat in a semicircle, their faces grave. At the center stood Elder Makia, her silver hair gleaming in the light streaming through the skylight. "Sekwa, Nodin," Elder Makia greeted them, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. "What transpired last night was unexpected. The howl we heard, it has unsettled the balance we've maintained for decades." Nodin stepped forward, his posture tense. "You said it sounded like Tasunka. How is that possible? And what does it mean for us?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Sequa could feel the tension radiating from the elders, could smell the fear and uncertainty that permeated the air. Finally, an older man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes spoke up. "There are things about our history, about Tasunka, that have been kept secret for good reason," he said, his voice gravelly with age. "But perhaps it's time the truth came to light." Elder Makia nodded solemnly. "Sequa, Nodin, what we're about to tell you must not leave this room. The fate of both our packs depends on it." As the elders began their tale, Sequa felt as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting. The story that unfolded was one of power, betrayal, and a curse that had haunted both packs for generations. Tasunka, they revealed, had been more than just a powerful alpha. He had been a dreamwalker, a rare and feared type of shifter with the ability to move between the physical world and the spirit realm. This power had made him both revered and feared, and ultimately it had led to his downfall. 20 years ago, Elder Makia continued, her eyes distant with memory, Tasunka discovered an ancient artifact, a moonstone of immense power. He believed it could be used to break the curse that bound our packs to the contract marriages. But the magic was too strong, too unpredictable. The blue-eyed elder picked up the tale. The artifact split Tasunka's soul, trapping part of him in the spirit realm. We hoped he had perished. But if what we heard last night is true, he may have found a way to return. Sequa's mind reeled with the implications. But what does this have to do with us? With our marriage? Nodin's hand found hers, squeezing gently. The touch sent a jolt through her, a reminder of the connection they now shared. "The contract," he said quietly. "It's more than just a marriage agreement, isn't it?" Elder Makia nodded gravely. "The contract is a seal, binding not just our packs but holding back the curse that Tasunka unleashed. Your union strengthens that seal, but if Tasunka has indeed returned, then the seal may be weakening," Sequa finished, a chill running down her spine. The implications hung heavy in the air. If the seal broke, the curse would be unleashed, potentially destroying both packs and upsetting the delicate balance of the shifter world. As the meeting concluded, Sequa's head spun with newfound knowledge and even more questions. She and Nodin left the hall in silence, the weight of their responsibility pressing down on them like a physical force. They walked to the edge of the territory, where the forest grew thick and wild. Sequa could feel her wolf clawing to be free, desperate to run and process everything she had learned. Beside her, Nodin seemed equally restless. "We should run," he said, his voice low and intense. "Clear our heads." Sequa nodded, already feeling the familiar tingle of the change coursing through her body. In moments, where two humans had stood, two wolves now faced each other, Sequa's coat a shimmering silver, Nodin's a deep storm cloud gray. They ran, paws pounding against the earth, weaving through trees and leaping over streams. The physical exertion helped to quiet the turmoil in Sequa's mind, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running towards something as much as they were running away. As they reached a high cliff overlooking a valley, they shifted, back to human form. Sequa gasped for breath, the cool air soothing against her flushed skin. Nodin stood beside her, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "What are we going to do?" she asked, finally breaking the silence between them. Nodin turned to her, his dark eyes intense. "We find a way to break the curse without destroying the seal. We protect our packs. And..." He hesitated, reaching out to touch the crescent moon birthmark on her wrist. "We figure out what this connection between us really means." The touch of his fingers against her skin sent a shiver through Sequa that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. Despite the arranged nature of their marriage, she couldn't deny the pull she felt towards him, a pull that went beyond physical attraction or the magic of the contract. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, a howl echoed in the distance. It was the same haunting sound they had heard the night before, Tasunka's call. Nodin's body tensed, his eyes scanning the tree line. "We're not alone out here," he growled, his form already beginning to shimmer with the promise of transformation. Sequa's wolf surged forward, responding to the threat. But before either of them could shift, a figure emerged from the shadows of the forest. It was a woman, her long white hair flowing behind her like a banner, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Sequa's heart stopped. She would recognize that face anywhere, even after 5 years of absence. "Mother?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Helena Moondancer stood before them, but she was changed. There was a wildness about her, an aura of power that made the air around her crackle with energy. When she spoke, her voice seemed to echo from both everywhere and nowhere. "My daughter," Helena said, her eyes fixed on Sequa. "The time has come for you to learn the truth about your heritage, about the curse, and about the destiny that awaits you both." As night fell over the mountains, Sequa realized that the contract binding her to Noden was only the beginning. A much greater journey lay ahead, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, and the delicate balance between the human world and the realm of spirits. The moon rose, full and bright, casting its silver light over the trio on the cliff. In its glow, Sequa could almost see the threads of fate weaving around them, binding their destinies together in ways she was only beginning to understand. The night air crackled with tension as Sequa stood frozen, her eyes locked on the ethereal figure of her long-lost mother. Helena Moondancer's presence seemed to blur the lines between the physical world and the spirit realm, her form shimmering, like moonlight on water. Noden moved protectively closer to Sequa, his body tense and ready for action. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "How are you here? And what do you mean about Sequa's destiny?" Helena's otherworldly gaze shifted to Noden, and for a moment, a flicker of recognition and something akin to sorrow passed across her face. "You've grown strong, Noden Thunderwolf. Your father would be proud." Sequa felt Noden stiffen. Beside her at the mention of his father, another piece of the puzzle she had yet to understand. But her focus remained on her mother, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. 5 years, Sequa whispered, her voice trembling. "You've been gone for 5 years, and now you just appear out of nowhere? Where have you been? Why did you leave us?" Helena's expression softened. A hint of the mother Sequa remembered shining through the mystical aura that surrounded her. "Oh, my dear daughter, I never wanted to leave you. But there are forces at work far beyond what you can imagine. I had to go to protect you and our people." She gestured for them to follow her into the forest. As they walked, the trees seemed to part before them, creating a path that hadn't existed moments before. The very air hummed with ancient magic, making Sequa's skin tingle and her wolf stir restlessly beneath the surface. They emerged in a moonlit clearing, at the center of which stood a circle of standing stones. Each stone was etched with symbols that seemed to shift and change as Sequa looked at them, making her head spin if she tried to focus too hard. Helena turned to face them, her white hair gleaming in the moonlight. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about our world, about your heritage, and about the true nature of the curse that binds our packs." She waved her hand, and the air between them shimmered, forming translucent images that moved and changed as she spoke. "Long ago, before the time of the first shift, our ancestors lived in harmony with the spirit world. They were guardians of the balance between realms, able to walk between worlds at will. The images showed figures that were neither fully human nor fully wolf, moving between shimmering portals of light. But there were those who sought to exploit this power for their own gain," Helena continued, her voice taking on a sorrowful tone. "They delved into dark magics, trying to control the spirit realm and bend it to their will. Their actions tore a rift between worlds, unleashing chaos and destruction. The peaceful scenes gave way to images of battle and devastation. Spirit, creatures pouring through rifts in reality to wreak havoc on the physical world. To save both realms, a great sacrifice was made. The most powerful among our ancestors used their life force to create a seal, closing the rifts and separating the worlds. But the price was high. They lost their ability to shift freely between forms, becoming bound to the cycles of the moon and the rhythms of nature." Sequa watched in awe as the images showed the creation of the seal, a blinding light that pushed back the chaos and restored balance. But in its wake, she saw the first shifters emerge, their transformations now tied to the phases of the moon. "The curse you speak of," Helena explained, her eyes meeting Sequa's, "is not truly a curse, but a safeguard. The contract marriages between our packs are part of the seal, renewing and strengthening it with each generation. Without them, the barriers between worlds would weaken and the chaos would return." Nodin stepped forward, his brow furrowed, in concentration. "But what about Tasunka? The elder said he found a way to break the curse." Helena's expression darkened. "Tasunka was misguided. He believed he could restore our people to their original power, to break free from the limitations of the seal. But in doing so, he risked unleashing forces beyond his control." The images shifted again, showing a familiar face, Tasunka in his prime, holding a glowing moonstone. As they watched, the stone's power seemed to tear him apart, splitting his essence between the physical and spirit realms. "I've spent the last 5 years searching for a way to undo the damage Tasunka caused," Helena said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "To find a way to restore balance without risking the seal that protects both worlds." Sequa's mind reeled with the weight of this new information. She touched the crescent moon birthmark on her wrist, seeing it now not as a symbol of her predetermined fate, but as a mark of her heritage and responsibility. "But why us?" she asked, gesturing between herself and Nodin. "Why is our union so important?" Helena's gaze softened as she looked at the two of them. "Because you, my daughter, are more than just a moon dancer, and Nodin is more than just a storm chaser. You both carry within you the potential to bridge the gap between worlds, to heal the rift that has existed for generations." She reached out, gently taking Sequa's hand and placing it in Nodin's. The moment their skin touched, a surge of energy pulsed through them both, making the air around them shimmer with an otherworldly light. "Your bond," Helena explained, "when fully realized, has the power to strengthen the seal in ways no other union has before. But it also presents a danger. If Tasunka has indeed found a way to return, he will stop at nothing to use your connection for his own purposes." Nodin's grip on Sequa's hand tightened protectively. "How do we stop him? How do we control this power?" Helena's expression turned grave. "It won't be easy. You'll need to learn to work together, to trust each other completely. The journey ahead will test you both in ways you can't imagine." She turned, waving her hand over the standing stones. The symbols etched into their surface began to glow, forming a complex pattern of light that hovered in the air before them. "This is the key to unlocking your true potential," Helena explained. "An ancient rite that will bind your spirits together, allowing you to access the power of both your bloodlines. But be warned, once begun, there's no turning back. The process will be dangerous, and if you're not truly compatible, it could destroy you both." Sequa felt a chill run down her spine at her mother's words. She looked at Nodin, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Instead, she found determination and a warmth that made her heart skip a beat. "We don't have a choice," Nodin said firmly. "If this is what it takes to protect our packs and maintain the balance, then we have to try." Sequa nodded, feeling a surge of admiration for the man she had been forced to marry. Despite the arranged nature of their union, she was beginning to see qualities in him that resonated with her own values and determination. "What do we need to do?" she asked, turning back to her mother. Helena's expression was a mix of pride and concern. "The ritual must be performed at the next full moon, when the veil between worlds is thinnest. But before then, you must learn to work together, to trust each other implicitly. Your bond must be strong enough to withstand the forces that will try to tear you apart." She reached into a pouch at her waist, pulling out 2 small, smooth stones, one black as night, the other white as snow. "These focus stones will help you begin to access your shared power. Practice with them daily, learn to feel the energy flowing between you." As Sequa took the white stone and Nodin the black, another pulse of energy surged through them. For a moment, Sequa could swear she felt Nodin's heartbeat as if it were her own, saw flashes of memories that weren't hers, A young boy running through a storm, the feel of wind beneath powerful wings. "Remember," Helena cautioned, her form already beginning to fade like mist in the morning sun. "Tasunka will be searching for you. Trust no one outside of your closest circle. The fate of both worlds rests in your hands." As Helena disappeared, leaving Sequa and Noden alone in the moonlit clearing, the weight of their newfound knowledge and responsibility settled over them like a heavy cloak. Sequa turned to Noden, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure about this? We barely know each other and now we're supposed to save the world?" Noden's hand found hers again, the touch sending another spark of energy between them. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly, "but I do know that I'm willing to face it with you. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." As they made their way back through the forest, the first light of dawn breaking over the mountains, Sequa felt a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and the weight of centuries of history. But for the first time since the contract ceremony, she felt a glimmer of hope. This arranged marriage, she realized, might just be the beginning of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. As she glanced at Noden, catching his eye and sharing a small smile, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them not just as contract mates, but as true partners. The howl of a lone wolf echoed in the distance as they reached the edge of storm chaser territory, a reminder that time was short and the stakes were high. With renewed determination, Sequa squeezed Noden's hand, ready to begin their training and unlock the secrets of their shared destiny. The days following their encounter with Helena blurred together in a whirlwind of training, secrets, and growing tension. Sequa and Noden sequestered themselves in a remote cabin deep within storm chaser territory, away from prying eyes and the well-meaning but constant supervision of the elders. The cabin, a sturdy structure of logs and stone, sat nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pines. A crystal-clear stream bubbled nearby, its soothing sound a constant backdrop to their intense training sessions. Here, away from the pressures of their respective packs, they could focus on the monumental task before them. On the third morning of their self-imposed exile, Sequa stood on the cabin's porch, watching the mist rise from the valley floor. The white focus stone Helena had given her sat cool and heavy in her palm, a constant reminder of the power they were trying to unlock. "Ready for another round?" Noden's voice came from behind her, deep and slightly husky from sleep. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, his black stone twirling between his fingers with practiced ease. Sequa nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the sight of him. Over the past few days, she'd come to appreciate not just Noden's physical strength but his quick mind and dry sense of humor. The arranged nature of their marriage still chafed, but she was beginning to see the potential for a true partnership. They made their way to a small clearing near the stream, sitting cross-legged across from each other. The routine had become familiar. Clasping their free hands together, focus stones held in the other, they closed their eyes and concentrated on the energy flowing between them. At first, there was nothing but the sound of the stream and the wind in the trees. Then, slowly, Sequa began to feel a warmth spreading from where their hands were joined. It traveled up her arm, across her chest, and settled somewhere deep, in her core. "I can feel it," Noden murmured, his eyes still closed. "It's stronger today." Sequa hummed in agreement, focusing on the sensation. In her mind's eye, she could almost see the energy, a swirling mix of silver and gold, like moonlight and lightning intertwined. As the connection deepened, flashes of images began to appear. A young Noden, no more than 7 or 8, standing in the midst of a raging thunderstorm, arms outstretched and laughing as lightning danced around him. Sequa herself, barely a teenager, sneaking out of her family's home to dance beneath a full moon, feeling the pull of its power for the first time. The images came faster, a dizzying array of memories both joyful and painful. Sequa saw Noden's first shift, felt the exhilaration and fear as his body changed for the first time. She experienced the crushing weight of responsibility as he was named heir to the Storm Chaser leadership. In turn, she felt Noden witnessing her own pivotal moments. The day she discovered her healing abilities, the night her mother disappeared, the mix of dread and resignation when she learned of her impending contract marriage. As the connection deepened, Their individual memories began to blur, merging into shared experiences. Sequoia felt the wind beneath powerful wings, soaring through storm clouds charged with electricity. Nodin experienced the serene power of a moonlit forest, every plant and creature pulsing with life energy he could sense and influence. The intensity of the connection built to a crescendo, the swirling energy in their minds growing brighter and brighter until they both gasped, eyes flying open as the connection suddenly snapped. Sequoia found herself panting, her whole body tingling with residual energy. Across from her, Nodin looked equally affected, a thin sheen of sweat glistening on his brow. That was, Sequoia began, struggling to find words to describe the experience. Intense, Nodin finished for her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We're definitely making progress. As they caught their breath, Sequoia couldn't help but feel a new level of understanding between them. The shared memories, the glimpses into each other's deepest fears and dreams, had forged a connection that went beyond their arranged marriage or even their shared destiny. I saw your father, Sequoia said softly, remembering a particularly poignant memory of a stern-faced man with Nodin's eyes. He seemed hard on you. Nodin's expression tightened slightly, but he nodded. He believed in tough love, wanted to make sure I was strong enough to lead the pack one day. He paused, then added, I saw your mother, the night she left. I'm so sorry, Sequoia. That must have been devastating. Sequoia felt a lump form in her throat at the memory. It was. For a long time I thought it was something I'd done, that I wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough to be the daughter she wanted. Without thinking, Nodin reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The touch sent another spark of energy between them, but this time it felt comforting rather than overwhelming. She left to protect you, he said softly. I could feel it in the memory. Whatever her reasons, they came from a place of love. Sequoia nodded, grateful for his understanding. As they sat there, hands still joined, she marveled at how quickly their relationship had evolved. From strangers bound by an ancient contract to, what? Partners? Friends? Something more? The moment was broken by a distant howl, a sound that made them both stiffen, immediately on alert. It wasn't the eerie, otherworldly call of Tasunka that they'd heard before, but it wasn't a normal wolf either. Rogue, Nodin growled, already on his feet and scanning the tree line. Close too. We should investigate. Sequoia nodded, her body already humming with pre-shift energy. In moments where two humans had stood, two powerful wolves now faced the forest. Nodin's storm-gray coat bristled with tension, while Sequoia's silver fur seemed to shimmer in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. They moved as one, years of training and their newly forged connection allowing them to communicate without words. Nodin took point, his larger frame breaking trail, while Sequoia followed slightly behind and to the side, her keen senses alert for any sign of danger. As they delved deeper into the forest, the scent of the rogue grew stronger, but there was something else underneath it, a familiar scent that made Sequoia's hackles rise. She let out a soft whine, drawing Nodin's attention. Something's not right, she projected, the thought speak coming more easily now after days of practice. This scent, it's mixed with something I know, something from the moon dancers. Nodin's ear twitched in acknowledgement. Could it be a trap? Someone trying to lure us out? Before Sequoia could respond, a figure burst from the underbrush ahead of them. It was a wolf, but unlike any they'd seen before. Its fur was a patchwork of gray and white, as if two different wolves had been stitched together. But most striking were its eyes, one a stormy blue, the other a bright, unnatural green. The creature snarled, foam flecking its jaws, and launched itself at them with unnatural speed. Nodin and Sequoia reacted instinctively, months of training together kicking in. They split apart, flanking the attacker from both sides. As they fought, Sequoia realized with growing horror that this was no ordinary rogue. Its movements were too coordinated, its attacks too strategic, and underneath the madness in its eyes she caught flashes of intelligence and recognition. Nodin, she called out mentally as she dodged a vicious swipe of claws. I think this might be one of my packmates. Loka. He disappeared a few months ago. Nodin's shock rippled through their mental connection. How is that possible? He looks corrupted, Sequa finished grimly, like something's twisted him from the inside out. Their momentary distraction cost them. The creature, Loka, seized the opportunity to barrel into Nodin, sending him crashing into a nearby tree with a yelp of pain. As it turned its attention to Sequa, she saw madness and agony warring in its mismatched eyes. In that moment of connection, a flood of fragmented images assaulted Sequa's mind. Loka, human and terrified, strapped to a stone altar. A hooded figure looming over him, chanting in an ancient tongue. Moonstone shards driven into his flesh, their power warping and twisting his very essence. The psychic assault left Sequa reeling, giving the corrupted wolf an opening. Its jaws clamped down on her foreleg, eliciting a yelp of pain. But before it could press its advantage, a blur of gray fur slammed into it from the side. Nodin had recovered, and he fought with a fury Sequa had never seen before. His teeth found purchase on the rogue's throat, and for a moment it seemed the battle would end there. But then the creature's body began to shift and warp in unnatural ways, slipping from Nodin's grasp like smoke. We can't kill him, Sequa projected desperately. He's a victim in this. We need to subdue him, find a way to help him. Nodin's frustration was palpable, but he nodded in agreement. Together they circled the maddened wolf, looking for an opening. Sequa felt the focus stone, still clutched in her human hand within her shifted form, pulse with energy. Acting on instinct, she met Nodin's eyes. Together, she projected, feeling him understand without further explanation. As one, they lunged forward, their bodies connecting with the corrupted wolf from both sides. The moment they made contact, Sequa felt the energy within her stone surge forth, mingling with the power from Nodin's. A blinding light erupted between them, enveloping all three wolves in a cocoon of silver and gold energy. For a timeless moment, Sequa felt as if she were floating in a sea of pure power. She could sense Nodin beside her, their essences intertwined. And there, trapped between them, was the fragmented, tortured soul of Loka. With a mental push that felt like the most natural thing in the world, Sequa and Nodin directed the energy towards the corrupted wolf. The light intensified, burning away the darkness that had taken root in Loka's spirit. When the glow finally faded, Sequa found herself human again, panting and exhausted. Beside her, Nodin looked equally drained, and there, lying unconscious between them, was the very human and very naked form of Loka. As they caught their breath, Sequa and Nodin exchanged a look of wonder and trepidation. What they had just done went far beyond anything they had practiced, or even thought possible. We need to get him back to the cabin, Nodin said, already moving to lift Loka's prone form. And then we need to contact the elders. Whatever's happening, whatever was done to him, it's worse than we imagined. Sequa nodded, her mind racing with the implications of what they'd discovered. As they made their way back to the cabin, supporting Loka between them, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The corruption they'd seen in Loka, the unnatural melding of Moondancer and Stormchaser traits. It all pointed to a darker purpose behind Tasunka's return, and as the weight of their responsibility settled even more heavily on her shoulders, Sequa found herself grateful for Nodin's steady presence beside her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever darkness they would have to face, at least they would face it together. The cabin, once a sanctuary of quiet training, now buzzed with tense energy. Loka lay unconscious on the worn couch, his chest rising and falling in an uneven rhythm. Sequa knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his body as she used her healing abilities to assess the damage. Nodin paced the small living area, his powerful frame coiled with restless energy. Anything? He asked, pausing to look at Sequa with concern etched on his face. She shook her head, frustration evident in the set of her shoulders. It's like nothing I've ever encountered before. His body is whole, but his spirit, she trailed off, struggling to find words to describe the wrongness she sensed. It's as if pieces of him have been torn away and replaced with something else. A low groan from Loka interrupted their conversation. His eyes fluttered open, one still that unnatural green while the other had returned to its original warm brown. C'est quoi? He croaked, his voice raw and confused. Where? What happened? Sequoia squeezed his hand reassuringly, even as she exchanged a wary glance with Noden. You're safe now, Loka. We found you in the forest. Do you remember anything? Loka's face contorted in pain as he tried to access his memories. Fragments. Darkness. Pain. His mismatched eyes suddenly widened in terror. The Hollow. He's coming. We have to warn. Before he could finish, his body went rigid, back arching off the couch as if in the throes of a seizure. A guttural scream tore from his throat, quickly morphing into an inhuman howl. Noden was there in an instant, helping Sequoia restrain Loka as his body thrashed violently. What's happening to him? He growled, struggling to hold the smaller man down without hurting him. Sequoia's hands glowed with healing energy as she tried to stabilize Loka, but it felt like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a paper fan. It's like something is fighting for control of his body, she gasped, pouring more power into her efforts. Suddenly, Loka's eyes snapped open, both now glowing that sickly green. When he spoke, it was with a voice that was not his own, deeper, filled with ancient malice. The seal weakens, little pups, the thing wearing Loka's face sneered. Your petty magics cannot stop what is to come. The Hollow hungers, and it will devour your world as it has so many others. With a final, violent convulsion, Loka's body went limp. The unnatural glow faded from his eyes, leaving them closed in what appeared to be a deep, exhausted sleep. Sequoia and Noden stumbled back, both panting from the exertion and shock of what they'd just witnessed. They stared at each other, the weight of this new threat settling over them like a shroud. We need to contact the elders, Noden said grimly, already moving towards the ancient communication crystal they'd been given for emergencies. This goes beyond anything we were prepared for. As Noden activated the crystal, its surface shimmering to life with swirling patterns of light, Sequoia turned her attention back to Loka. She placed a hand on his forehead, channeling her healing energy to soothe his troubled sleep. As she did, another flash of fragmented memories assaulted her mind. A moonless night, deep in unfamiliar woods. A circle of standing stones, their surfaces crawling with shadowy symbols. Hooded figures chanting in an ancient tongue. And at the center of it all, a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to devour light itself. Sequoia gasped, pulling her hand away as if burned. The vision left her feeling cold to her core, a sense of creeping dread settling in her stomach. The elders are on their way, Noden's voice pulled her from her dark thoughts. He knelt beside her, concern evident in his dark eyes. What did you see? Sequoia described the vision, her voice shaking slightly as she recounted the oppressive feeling of evil that had permeated the scene. Noden listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Hollow, he mused, the unfamiliar term sitting heavy in the air between them. Whatever it is, it's clear that Tasunka's return is just part of a much larger threat. Before Sequoia could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Noden moved to answer it, his body tense and ready for any potential threat. But when he opened the door, it was to reveal the familiar faces of Elder Makya and the blue-eyed, storm chaser elder they'd met before. Elder Makya, Elder Ahode, Noden greeted them, stepping aside to let them enter. Thank you for coming so quickly. The elder's eyes immediately went to Loka's prone form on the couch. Elder Makya's face paled visibly, while Elder Ahode's expression hardened into a grim mask. So it's true, Elder Makya whispered, her usually steady voice trembling slightly. The corruption has begun. Sequoia and Noden exchanged confused glances. You know what's happening to him? Sequoia asked, a mix of hope and trepidation in her voice. Elder Ahote nodded solemnly. We had hoped to shield you from this knowledge. A while longer, to give you time to grow into your powers. But it seems fate has other plans. The elders settled into chairs while Sequoia and Noden sat on the floor, the four of them forming a tight circle around Loka's sleeping form. The atmosphere in the cabin grew heavy with the weight of long-held secrets about to be revealed. Elder Makia began, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller, recounting an ancient legend. What you must understand is that the world you know, the reality you perceive, is but a thin veil over a much vaster and more terrifying truth. She waved her hand, and the air between them shimmered, forming ghostly images that moved and changed as she spoke. Long ago, in the time before time, there existed a race of beings so powerful they could shape reality itself. They were the guardians of the cosmic balance, protecting the multiverse from forces that sought to unmake creation. The images showed radiant beings of pure energy, their forms constantly shifting and changing, moving between worlds with ease. But their power attracted the attention of something ancient and hungry. Elder Ahote continued, his deep voice resonating with grim foreboding. A force of entropy and chaos that existed outside the laws of our reality. The people of your generation know it only as the Hollow, but its true name has been lost to time. The shimmering images darkened, showing a creeping void that consumed everything in its path. Worlds crumbled, stars winked out of existence, and even the radiant guardians fell before its insatiable hunger. In a last, desperate attempt to save what remained of creation, the guardians used their power to create a seal, Elder Makia explained. They poured their very essence into it, sacrificing themselves to hold back the Hollow and protect the remaining worlds. The image showed a blinding flash of light, pushing back the encroaching darkness. In its wake, a complex network of energy appeared, stretching across multiple realities. But the seal came with a price, Elder Ahote said gravely. The Guardians' power was diminished, their ability to move freely between worlds greatly reduced. Over time, they became what you now know as shifters, beings caught between human and animal form, their true nature hidden even from themselves. Sequa and Noden listened in stunned silence, trying to process the monumental revelations being laid before them. The implications were staggering, rewriting everything they thought they knew about their heritage and their place in the world. The contract marriages, Sequa said slowly, pieces falling into place in her mind. They're not just about maintaining peace between packs, are they? They're about preserving the seal. Elder Makia nodded approvingly. Exactly. By joining the bloodlines of different shifter tribes, we reinforce the connections that hold the seal in place. It's why such unions often produce children of exceptional power. But what does this have to do with Tasunka? Noden asked, his mind racing to connect all the pieces. And why is Loka corrupted like this? The elders exchanged a heavy glance before Elder Ahote spoke. Tasunka discovered the truth about our origins, about the seal. But instead of seeing it as something to be protected, he saw it as a limitation to be overcome. He believed that, by breaking the seal, he could restore our people to their original power, Elder Makia continued. But in his arrogance, he underestimated the danger. In attempting to breach the veil between worlds, he created cracks in the seal, cracks through which the influence of the Hollow could seep. The implications hit Sequa like a physical blow. So when we saw Loka in the forest, when he attacked us, he had been touched by the Hollow, Elder Ahote confirmed grimly. Corrupted by its influence, turned into a weapon against his own people. A heavy silence fell over the group as they all contemplated the gravity of the situation. Sequa felt overwhelmed, the weight of this new knowledge pressing down on her like a physical force. She glanced at Noden, finding some comfort in the determined set of his jaw and the steady presence of his hand, which had found its way to hers during the elder's explanation. So what do we do now? Noden asked, his voice filled with a mix of determination and barely concealed fear. How do we stop this Hollow? Elder Makia's eyes softened as she looked at the young couple. That, my dear ones, is where you come in. Your union is special, a joining of two of the most powerful bloodlines among our people. The potential of your combined power is unprecedented. We've seen glimpses of it, Sequa admitted, thinking back to their encounter with the corrupted Loka in the forest. But we're still learning to control it. Elder Ahote leaned forward, his intense gaze fixed on them both. You must accelerate your training, master the full extent of your abilities, for if the signs we've seen are correct, Tasunka is gathering followers, preparing to make another attempt to breach the seal. And if he succeeds, Elder Makia finished gravely, it will mean the end of not just our world, but countless others. As the full weight of their responsibility settled over them, Sekwa felt a mix of terror and determination coursing through her veins. She looked at Nodin, seeing her own emotions reflected in his eyes. We'll do whatever it takes, Nodin said firmly, squeezing Sekwa's hand. Whatever we have to learn, whatever sacrifices we have to make. We won't let our world fall to this hollow. Sekwa nodded in agreement, feeling a surge of affection for her contract mate. Despite the arranged nature of their union, she realized that there was no one else she'd rather face this challenge with. Elder Makia smiled, a glimmer of hope shining in her ancient eyes. Then let us begin. There is much to teach you, and precious little time. As the elders began outlining an intensive training regimen, Sekwa's mind raced with the enormity of what lay ahead. The fate of not just their packs, but entire worlds, rested on their shoulders. Yet as she felt the reassuring pressure of Nodin's hand in hers, the steady thrum of their shared power pulsing between them, she felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever darkness they would have to face, they would face it together. The moon rose outside, bathing the cabin in silver light. And in that moment, as four determined individuals bent their heads together in planning, the first seeds of a resistance against the encroaching hollow were sown. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense training, grueling physical challenges, and mind-bending magical exercises. Sekwa and Nodin pushed themselves to the limit and beyond, their bodies and spirits tested in ways they had never imagined possible. Under the watchful eyes of Elder Makia and Elder Ahote, they delved deep into the ancient lore of their people, uncovering secrets and techniques that had been lost for generations. They learned to channel the raw power of the elements, to communicate across vast distances with nothing but thought, and to move between the shadows of reality itself. But it was their work on strengthening their bond that proved the most challenging and rewarding. Each day, they would sit facing each other, hands clasped, focus stones pulsing with energy between them. They would dive into the swirling vortex of their combined power, learning to navigate the tumultuous currents of each other's thoughts and emotions. It was during one such session, nearly a month into their training, that everything changed. Sekwa sat cross-legged on the forest floor, her eyes closed in concentration. Across from her, Nodin mirrored her pose, their knees just barely touching. The air around them hummed with potential energy, leaves and small twigs lifting off the ground to swirl in lazy circles. As they sank deeper into their shared mindscape, Sekwa felt the familiar warmth of Nodin's presence enveloping her. But today, there was something different. A door that hadn't been there before, pulsing with an otherworldly light. Do you see it? Nodin's mental voice echoed in her mind. Yes, Sekwa replied, a mix of excitement and trepidation coloring her thoughts. Should we? Before she could finish the question, she felt Nodin's agreement. Together, they reached out with their combined will and pushed the door open. A flood of images and sensations washed over them, too fast and intense to process, individually. But as the initial shock faded, coherent scenes began to form. A vast, shimmering city of crystal spires and rainbow bridges, floating in a sea of stars. Beings of pure energy, their forms constantly shifting and changing, moving between worlds with the ease of stepping through a doorway. A creeping darkness at the edges of reality, hungering, consuming, growing ever stronger. A desperate battle, magic against entropy, order against chaos. The creation of the seal, a blinding flash of light and sacrifice pushing back the darkness. And through it all, a sense of connection, to each other, to the earth beneath their feet, to the very fabric of reality itself. When Sekwa opened, her eyes gasping for breath, she found herself and Nodin no longer sitting on the forest floor. They hovered several feet in the air, surrounded by a swirling vortex of elemental energy, earth, air, fire, and water dancing in perfect harmony around them. As they locked eyes, a new understanding passed between them. This was more than just shared memories or borrowed power. They had touched the very essence of what it meant to be guardians, heirs to an ancient and sacred duty. Slowly, they descended, back to the ground, the elemental energies dissipating like mist in the morning sun. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, processing the monumental shift in their understanding of the world and their place in it. Well, Nodin finally broke the silence, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I guess that explains a few things. Sequa couldn't help but laugh, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. It was laugh or cry at the sheer enormity of what they'd just experienced, and laughter felt infinitely preferable. Their mirth was interrupted by slow clapping from the edge of the clearing. They turned to find Elder Makia and Elder Ahote watching, them with a mix of pride and something that looked suspiciously like relief. It seems, Elder Ahote said, his usually stern face softened by a small smile, that you have finally accessed the ancestral memories. Elder Makia nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You now understand the true weight of your heritage, the responsibility that comes with your power. Sequa and Nodin exchanged a glance, a whole conversation passing between them in that single look. When Nodin spoke, his voice was filled with a new sense of purpose. We're ready, he said simply. Tell us what we need to do next. The elders led them back to the cabin, where maps and ancient texts were spread across every available surface. As they entered, Sequa's eyes were drawn to a familiar figure sitting at the kitchen table, Loka, looking pale but alert, his eyes once again their natural warm brown. Loka! Sequa rushed to embrace her packmate, relief washing over her. You're awake. How are you feeling? Loka returned the hug weakly, a haunted look in his eyes. Better, thanks to you and the elders, but the things I saw, Sequa, the darkness, it's still out there waiting. Nodin placed a comforting hand on Loka's shoulder. We know, and we're going to stop it, but we need your help. Can you tell us what you remember? Over the next hour, Loka recounted his ordeal, how he had been ambushed while on patrol, dragged to a hidden ritual site deep in unclaimed territory. He spoke of hooded figures chanting in an ancient tongue, of Tasunka's face twisted with madness and hunger for power, of the creeping darkness that had invaded his mind and body. They're planning something big, Loka finished, his voice hoarse from talking. A ritual to tear open the veil between worlds. Tasunka believes he can control the power of the Hollow, use it to remake our world in his image. But from what I saw, there will be nothing left to rule if he succeeds. Elder Makia's face was grim as she unrolled an ancient map on the table. We believe we've located the site where Tasunka is gathering his followers. It's an ancient place of power, one of the original anchors of the seal. She pointed to a location deep in the wilderness, far from any claimed pack territories. The standing stones of the first Guardians. Legend says it's where the original seal was forged, where the Guardians made their last stand against the Hollow. It's also where the veil between worlds is thinnest, Elder Ahote added. If Tasunka is going to make his move, it will be there. Nodin studied the map intently, his tactical mind already formulating plans. When? How much time do we have? The next full moon, Loka answered, a shudder running through his body. 3 days from now. That's when the veil will be at its weakest. Sequa felt a chill run down her spine. 3 days. It seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. So what's the plan? We can't let Tasunka complete this ritual. Elder Makia's eyes were solemn as she looked at the young couple. You, too, will lead a small team to infiltrate the ritual site. Your goal is to stop Tasunka and close any breaches in the veil he manages to open. The rest of us, Elder Ahote continued, will work to reinforce the seal from our side. We'll gather every able-bodied shifter from both packs, channel our combined power to strengthen the barriers between worlds. Sequa nodded, determination settling over her like a mantle. Who's on our team? Loka, for one, Elder Makia said. His experience with the corruption may prove valuable, and we have a few other volunteers, skilled warriors and magics. users from both packs who have been briefed on the situation. As if on cue, the cabin door opened, admitting a group of familiar faces. Sequoia recognized Niabi, a fierce moondancer warrior with a gift for battle magic. Beside her stood Kajika, a storm chaser known for his tracking skills and almost supernatural stealth. Two more followed, twins from the Moondancers, Ayana and Bodaway. They were relatively young, barely out of their teens, but their talent for elemental magic was unparalleled. Nodin greeted each of them with a nod of respect. "Thank you all for volunteering. I know we're asking you to risk everything." Niabi stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Our world is at stake. There's no place we'd rather be than fighting beside our future alphas." The others murmured agreement, and Sequoia felt a swell of pride and gratitude. This was what it meant to be part of a pack, to stand together in the face of impossible odds. The next few hours were a flurry of activity as they planned their approach, studied maps of the area around the standing stones, and gathered supplies for the journey. Through it all, Sequoia felt a growing sense of anticipation, a mix of fear and excitement thrumming through her veins. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin, Sequoia found a moment of quiet. She stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool evening air. The weight of their task settled heavily on her shoulders, and for a moment, doubt crept in. Were they really ready for this? Could they truly stand against a force that had nearly unmade reality itself? She felt Nodin's presence before he spoke, a warm, solid comfort at her back. "Second thoughts?" he asked softly, no judgment in his voice. Sequoia turned to face him, studying the face that had become so dear to her over these past weeks. "Not second thoughts," she said slowly. "Just the magnitude of it all. If we fail." Nodin nodded, understanding in his eyes. He reached out, taking her hands in his. "I know. But remember what we saw in those ancestral memories. Our people have faced this darkness before. We carry their strength, their courage." He paused, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And we have something they didn't. We have each other." As he spoke, Sequoia felt their bond pulse between them, warm and reassuring. She realized with a start that somewhere along the way this arranged marriage had become something far more. Nodin wasn't just her contract mate or her partner in this great responsibility. He had become her rock, her confidant, her. Before she could finish the thought, Nodin leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. The gesture was intimate, charged with unspoken emotion. "Whatever happens," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin, "we face it together." Sequoia closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the moment. "Together," she agreed softly. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength and comfort from each other's presence. When they finally pulled apart, Sequoia felt renewed, her doubts pushed back by the warmth of their connection. As they turned to go back inside, to rejoin their team and finalize their plans, Sequoia caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the forest. For just a moment, she thought she saw a flash of white fur and glowing eyes. Her mother's wolf form, watching over them. But when she blinked, the apparition was gone, leaving her to wonder if it had been real or just a product of her anxious mind. Either way, she took it as a sign, a reminder of all they were fighting for, of the legacy they carried. With renewed determination, Sequoia followed Nodin back into the cabin. In 3 days' time, they would face their greatest challenge yet. But as she looked around at the faces of their small but determined team, she felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. They were the heirs of the Guardians, the protectors of the seal. And come what may, they would stand against the darkness, guardians of a fragile light that burned in defiance of the encroaching void. The final preparations began, each member of the team readying themselves for the battle to come. As night fell over the forest, the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when the fate of worlds would hang in the balance. The journey to the Standing Stones was fraught with tension and an ever-growing sense of foreboding. Sequoia, Nodin, and their small team moved swiftly through the wilderness, using every trick and skill at their disposal to avoid detection. As they drew closer to their destination, the very air seemed to thicken, charged with an otherworldly energy that set their wolves on edge. On the evening of the second day, as they made camp in a sheltered ravine, Sequa found herself unable to sleep. The impending full moon tugged at her blood, its power amplified by the proximity to the ancient site. She slipped away from the others, needing a moment of solitude to center herself. She found a small clearing bathed in moonlight, the silver glow turning the world around her into a dreamlike landscape. As she stood there, eyes closed and face tilted up to the waxing moon, she felt a presence materialize beside her. "You should be resting." Nodin's voice was soft, concern evident in his tone. Sequa opened her eyes, offering him a small smile. "I could say the same to you." He shrugged, moving to stand beside her. For a long moment they simply stood in companionable silence, drawing comfort from each other's presence. "Are you afraid?" Sequa finally asked, voicing the question that had been gnawing at her since they set out. Nodin was quiet for a beat, considering. "Yes," he admitted finally, "but not of dying. I'm afraid of failing, of letting down our people, our ancestors. You." The raw honesty in his voice made Sequa's heart ache. She turned to face him, reaching out to cup his cheek in her hand. "You could never let me down, Nodin. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Remember?" He leaned into her touch, his eyes softening as they met hers. "Together," he agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. The air between them seemed to crackle with energy, their bond pulsing with an intensity that took Sequa's breath away. Before she could second-guess herself, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was equal parts tenderness and desperation. Nodin responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her waist to pull her closer. The kiss deepened, years of arranged marriage tension and weeks of growing affection culminating in this moment of raw, honest connection. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Sequa rested her forehead against Nodin's. "I love you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined it would happen, but Nodin silenced her with another quick kiss. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Contract or no contract, fate or choice, you're the one I want by my side, Sequa. In this fight, and in whatever comes after." The weight of their declaration hung in the air between them, a promise and a prayer in the face of the uncertain future. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, drawing strength from their newfound understanding. Eventually, reluctantly, they made their way back to camp. As they settled down to try and get some rest, Sequa felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, she would face them with Nodin by her side, not just as her contract mate or her battle partner, but as the man she loved. Dawn broke cold and misty, the sun struggling to pierce the heavy cloud cover. As the team broke camp and prepared for the final leg of their journey, an oppressive silence seemed to blanket the forest. No birds sang, no small animals scurried through the underbrush. It was as if the very land was holding its breath, waiting for the coming confrontation. They moved swiftly and silently through the trees, Kajika's tracking skills proving invaluable as he led them along hidden paths and ancient game trails. As they drew closer to the standing stones, Sequa felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The air thrummed with barely contained power, making it difficult to breathe. It was Loka who first sensed the danger. He froze suddenly, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air. "Ambush," he hissed, just as the first arrow whistled past Sequa's ear. The forest erupted into chaos. Dark-clad figures melted out of the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unnatural green light, more of Tasunka's corrupted followers. Sequa and Nodin reacted instinctively, their bodies shifting mid-leap as they charged into battle. The fight was brutal and swift. Niabi's battle magic crackled through the air, striking down enemies with bolts of pure energy. The twins, Ayana and Badaway, moved in perfect sync, their elemental powers combining to create a whirlwind of fire and ice that cut through the attacking forces. Sequa found herself back-to-back with Nodin, their wolves working in seamless harmony. She could feel their bond pulsing between them, stronger than ever before. As one particularly large attacker lunged for Noden's throat, Sequa reacted without thinking. She channeled her energy through their connection, feeling Noden do the same. The resulting blast of power sent their attacker flying, his body disintegrating into shadow before it hit the ground. When the last of the ambushers fell, the team regrouped, panting and checking each other for injuries. "Is everyone all right?" Noden asked, his eyes scanning their small group with concern. There were nods all around, though Kajika was favoring. His left leg where a nasty gash oozed blood. Sequa moved to heal him, but he waved her off. "Save your strength," he growled. "We'll need every ounce of power for what's ahead." They pressed on, moving more cautiously now. As they crested a final ridge, the standing stones came into view, and Sequa felt her breath catch in her throat. The ancient circle stood in a vast clearing, 12 massive stones arranged in a perfect circle around a central altar. But the scene before them was far from the sacred, peaceful sight they had expected. The very air seemed to warp and twist around the stones, reality itself, buckling under the strain of dark magics. At the center of it all stood Tasunka, his form barely recognizable as the noble alpha he had once been. His body was a twisted amalgamation of wolf and man, fur matted with blood and shadows, seeming to cling to him like a second skin. Around him, a group of hooded figures chanted in an eldritch tongue, their voices rising and falling in a nauseating rhythm. But most horrifying of all was the tier in reality that hovered above the central altar. It was like a window into a realm of pure darkness, tendrils of void reaching out hungrily towards our world. And through that tier, Sequa caught glimpses of something vast and ancient and utterly alien, the Hollow, straining against the weakening barriers of the seal. "We're too late," Loka whispered, his voice choked with horror. "The ritual has already begun." Noden's jaw set in determination. "No," he growled. "We can still stop this. We have to." He turned to address the team, his eyes blazing with the fire of a born leader. "Nyabi, Kajika, you two handle crowd control. Keep those cultists off our backs. Ayana, Bodaway, focus on disrupting their ritual circle. Anything you can do to break their concentration." The four nodded, determination etched on their faces as they prepared for battle. "Loka," Noden continued, "you're with us. Your experience with the corruption might give us an edge against whatever Tasunka's become." Finally, Noden turned to Sequa, reaching out to take her hand. "You and I, we go for Tasunka himself. Our combined power is the best chance we have of closing that rift and reinforcing the seal." Sequa squeezed his hand, feeling their bond pulse between them. "Together," she said softly. Noden nodded, a fierce smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Together." With a final shared look of determination, the team sprang into action. They descended upon the ritual site like avenging spirits, magic and claw and fang tearing into the unprepared cultists. Nyabi's battle magic lit up the night, bolts of energy striking down hooded figures left and right. Kajika moved like a shadow, his stealth allowing him to take out key targets before they even realized he was there. The twins were a force of nature, their combined elemental powers wreaking havoc on the carefully constructed ritual circle. Fire melted carefully placed crystals while ice froze channels of dark energy, disrupting the flow of corrupted magic. Through it all, Sequa and Noden fought their way towards the central altar, Loka at their backs. As they drew closer to Tasunka, the air grew thick and heavy, reality itself seeming to warp around them. Tasunka turned to face them, his twisted features splitting in a horrific grin. "Ah, the fated pair," he crooned, his voice a guttural parody of its former nobility. "Come to witness the rebirth of our people, the restoration of our true power?" "We've come to stop you," Noden growled, his body already beginning to shift. "This madness ends now." Tasunka threw back his head and laughed, the sound sending chills down Sequa's spine. "Madness? This is clarity, pup. The Hollow has shown me the truth. Our people were meant for so much more than this half-life, bound by seals and contracts." As he spoke, tendrils of darkness began to coalesce, around him writhing like living shadows. "Join me," he offered, extending a clawed hand. "Together, we could remake this world, rule as gods over a new age of shifters." Sequa felt a tendril of that darkness brush against her mind, offering visions of power beyond imagining. For a moment, she felt herself waver, tempted by the promise of unlimited potential. But then she felt Nodin's presence in her mind, warm and steady and full of love. It anchored her, cutting through the seductive whispers of the void. "Never!" she spat, her own shift rippling through her body. Beside her, she felt Nodin complete his transformation, his massive storm-gray wolf form a comforting presence at her side. Tassunka's face twisted in rage. "Then you will die with the old world," he snarled, launching himself at them with inhuman speed. The battle that followed was like nothing Sequa had ever experienced. Tassunka moved with impossible grace, his corrupted form allowing him to bend and twist in ways that defied physics. Shadows clung to him like armor, absorbing their attacks, and lashing out with razor-sharp edges. Sequa and Nodin fought as one, their movements perfectly synchronized thanks to their strengthened bond. When Tassunka's claws raked across Nodin's flank, Sequa felt the pain as if it were her own, and when her teeth found purchase on Tassunka's arm, Nodin capitalized on the opening without hesitation. All around them, the battle raged. Sequa caught glimpses of their teammates holding their own against the cultists, but she could see that they were slowly being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. And all the while, the tier in reality grew larger, the presence of the hollow pressing against the weakening barriers of the seal with increasing force. Sequa could feel reality itself groaning under the strain, the very fabric of their world, threatening to unravel. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Sequa reached out through her bond with Nodin. "The focus stones," she projected. "If we combine their power with the energy of the standing stones..." She felt Nodin's immediate understanding and agreement. As one, they disengaged from Tassunka, sprinting towards the nearest of the ancient monoliths. They shifted back to human, form mid-stride, hands clasped tightly together as they pressed their focus stones against the weathered surface of the stone. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Power surged through them, raw and ancient and nearly too much to contain. Sequa felt as if her very atoms were vibrating, threatening to fly apart under the strain. But Nodin was there, his presence steady and unwavering in her mind. Together they channeled the energy, directing it towards the tear in reality. Tassunka, realizing what they were attempting, let out a roar of fury. He charged towards them, shadows swirling around him like a dark tornado. But before he could reach them, a blur of motion intercepted him. Loka, his eyes blazing with determination, tackled Tassunka to the ground. "Now!" he shouted, grappling with the corrupted alpha. "Close it now!" Sequa and Nodin poured everything they had into their efforts. They drew on every scrap of training, every ounce of their combined power, every bit of love and determination and hope they could muster. The world around them faded away, narrowing down to this singular purpose. Through their bond, Sequa could feel the ancient power of the Guardians flowing through them, generations of protectors lending their strength to this final, desperate stand against the darkness. With a sound like reality itself tearing, the rift began to close. The tendrils of void retreated, pulled back into the collapsing tear. Tassunka let out a howl of anguish and rage as his connection to the hollow was severed. As the last of the darkness was sealed away, a shockwave of pure energy radiated out from the standing stones. It washed over the battlefield, cleansing the corrupted cultists and restoring balance to the turbulent energies that had been unleashed. When the light faded and Sequa could see again, she found herself on her knees, still clutching Nodin's hand. Around them, the clearing was silent, save for the labored breathing of their teammates. Tassunka lay motionless on the ground, the corruption purged from his body. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without the dark power that had sustained him. As the team regrouped, checking on each other and assessing the aftermath of the battle, Sequa felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. They had done it. Against all odds, they had reinforced the seal and stopped the hollow from breaking through into their world. But as she looked around at the devastation of the battlefield, At the wounded and exhausted faces of her friends and allies, she knew that this was only the beginning. The threat of the Hollow might have been pushed back, but it was not gone entirely. And the repercussions of what had happened here would be felt throughout the shifter world for generations to come. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Sequoia turned to Nodin. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. But when he met her gaze, she saw the same love and determination that had carried them through this impossible night. "What now?" she asked softly, leaning into his embrace. Nodin pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Now," he said, his voice rough with fatigue but filled with hope, "we begin to rebuild, together." As the sun rose over the standing stones, bathing the ancient circle in golden light, Sequoia felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever threats might still lurk in the shadows, she knew that they would face them as they had faced this night, with courage, with determination, and with the unbreakable bond of love that had transformed their arranged marriage into something truly extraordinary. The journey that had begun with a contract signed under the harvest moon had led them here, to this moment of victory and new beginnings. And as Sequoia looked out over the awakening world, her hand firmly clasped in Nodin's, she knew that their greatest adventures were still to come. The journey back to their territories was a stark contrast to their stealthy approach. Where before they had moved in tense silence, now the air was filled with a mixture of exhausted relief and cautious celebration. The weight of their victory sat heavily upon them, tempered by the knowledge of how close they had come to utter catastrophe. As they traveled, Sequoia found herself constantly aware of Nodin's presence at her side. Their bond, strengthened by the crucible of battle and their shared declaration of love, hummed between them like a living thing. Occasionally, their eyes would meet, and a wealth of unspoken emotion would pass between them. Pride, love, lingering, fear, and a deep abiding gratitude for each other's survival. It was on the second evening of their return journey that they encountered the first signs of the wider impact of their battle. As they made camp in a sheltered grove, a chorus of howls echoed through the night, coming from all directions. The voices of hundreds, perhaps thousands of shifters raised in a song of victory and renewal. Loka, who had been quiet and introspective since the battle, lifted his head at the sound. "They know," he said softly, wonder in his voice. "Somehow, they all know what we've done." Niabi nodded, her usually fierce expression softened by exhaustion and relief. The reforging of the seal, it must have resonated through the entire shifter world. They felt the danger, and now they feel its passing. As the howls continued, each member of the team felt compelled to add their own voices to the chorus. One by one, they shifted into their wolf forms and lifted their muzzles to the sky. Sequoia felt the vibration of the howl in her very bones, a primal expression of triumph and belonging. When they finally fell silent, Sequoia found herself leaning against Nodin's solid warmth, both of them still in wolf form. Through their bond, she could feel the turmoil of emotions beneath his outward calm. Pride in what they had accomplished, lingering fear of what might have been, and a deep, abiding love that made her heart swell. "We did it," she projected, nuzzling into his thick fur. "We really did it." Nodin's mental voice was warm with affection. "We did, together." As the team settled in for the night, a sense of peace descended over the camp. For the first time since they had set out on this mission, they allowed themselves to truly rest, secure in the knowledge that they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the very world was celebrating their victory. As they broke camp and prepared for the final leg of their journey, Sequoia noticed a change in the forest around them. The oppressive silence that had marked their outward journey was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of a thriving ecosystem. Birds singing, small animals scurrying through the underbrush, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was as if the land itself was breathing a sigh of relief, life reasserting itself in the wake of the averted catastrophe. As they walked, Sequoia found herself falling into step beside Loka. Her packmate had been uncharacteristically quiet since the battle, and she could sense the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging over him. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently, bumping her shoulder against his in a gesture of camaraderie. Loka was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with a mix of emotions Sequoia couldn't quite decipher. "I keep thinking about Tasunka," he admitted, "about how close I came to becoming like him. If you and Noden hadn't found me when you did." Sequoia felt a pang of sympathy for her friend. She reached out, squeezing his arm reassuringly. "But we did find you, and you fought it, Loka. You were strong enough to resist the corruption." Loka shook his head, a haunted look in his eyes. "Was I? Or was I just lucky? I felt it, Sequoia. The power, the temptation." For a moment, I understood why Tasunka did what he did. His words sent a chill down Sequoia's spine, but she pushed aside her own discomfort to focus on her friend's pain. "The fact that you can recognize that you're struggling with it, that's what makes you different from Tasunka. He gave in to the darkness. You fought it every step of the way." Loka managed a small, grateful smile. "Maybe you're right, I don't know if I'll ever feel clean again, you know? Like there's still a part of that corruption inside me, waiting for a moment of weakness." Sequoia nodded, understanding, all too well. She had felt the touch of that darkness herself, had felt its seductive whispers in the heat of battle. "We'll get through this," she promised. "All of us together. Whatever lingering effects there might be, we'll face them as a pack." As they continued their journey, Sequoia made a mental note to speak with the elders about arranging some form of counseling or support for those who had been touched by the corruption. The battle might be over, but the healing process was only just beginning. It was mid-afternoon when they finally crested the last ridge separating them from their home territories. The sight that greeted them took Sequoia's breath away. The valley below was filled with shifters from both packs, gathered together in a sea of faces both familiar and strange. As soon as they were spotted, a great cheer went up from the crowd, hundreds of voices raised in celebration. Sequoia felt Noden's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining as they gazed down at the welcoming committee. Through their bond, she could feel his mix of pride, relief, and a touch of nervousness at the reception awaiting them. "Ready?" he projected, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. Sequoia took a deep breath, drawing strength from his presence at her side. "Ready," she confirmed. Together they led their team down into the valley, where they were immediately engulfed by the jubilant crowd. Sequoia found herself passed from embrace to embrace, surrounded by the scent of pack and family and home. She caught glimpses of her teammates receiving similar welcomes. Niabi swept up in a bear hug by her burly father, the twins mobbed by a group of younger shifters who looked at them with awe, Kajika accepting congratulatory slaps on the back, with stoic grace. Through it all, Sequoia never lost her awareness of Noden. Even when they were separated by the press of bodies, she could feel him through their bond, a steady presence amidst the chaos of homecoming. Eventually, the crowd parted to reveal Elder Makya and Elder Ahote, their faces etched with relief and pride. "Well done," Elder Makya said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have saved us all." Elder Ahote nodded solemnly. "Your actions have reinforced the seal and pushed back the darkness. The shifter world owes you a debt that can never truly be repaid." Sequoia felt a blush creep up her cheeks at their praise. "We only did what we had to," she said softly. "What any of us would have done." Noden stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of a true alpha as he addressed the gathered shifters. "We may have been the ones to face Tasunka and the Hollow directly, but make no mistake, this victory belongs to all of us. Every shifter who lent their energy to reinforcing the seal, every pack member who stood guard over our territories, in our absence, we all played a part in saving our world." His words were met with another round of cheers, and Sequoia felt a swell of pride for the man she had come to love. This was the leader he was meant to be, strong, compassionate, and wise beyond his years. As the initial excitement of their return began to die down, practical matters reasserted themselves. The elders ushered the team towards a large tent that had been set up at the edge of the gathering, where healers waited to tend to their injuries and exhaustion. As Sequa allowed herself to be examined, her eyes never strayed far from Nodin. He was undergoing a similar checkup across the tent, and she could feel his mild annoyance at the fussing through their bond. It made her smile, a warm feeling of affection blooming in her chest. Once the healers were satisfied that there were no serious injuries or lingering magical effects, the elders gathered the team for a private debriefing. As Sequa and Nodin recounted the events at the Standing Stones, she was struck by how surreal it all seemed in retrospect. Had it really only been a few days since they had faced down an ancient evil and reforged the barriers between worlds? When they finished their report, a heavy silence fell over the tent. Finally, Elder Makia spoke, her voice grave. "You have all shown tremendous courage and skill, but I fear this may only be the beginning." Elder Ahodi nodded in agreement. "The hollow has been pushed back but not destroyed, and there may be others out there like Tasanka, those who would seek to exploit the power of the void for their own gain." Sequa felt a chill run down her spine at their words. She had hoped that their victory would mark an end to the danger, but deep down, she had known it couldn't be that simple. Nodin's voice was steady as he asked the question on all of their minds. "So what happens now?" The elders exchanged a look before Elder Makia answered. "Now we prepare. We train the next generation of guardians, strengthen the bonds between packs, and remain vigilant against any signs of renewed corruption. And you," Elder Ahote added, his eyes fixed on Sequa and Nodin, "will lead us in this new era. Your bond, your combined power, it makes you uniquely suited to guide our people through the challenges that lie ahead." Sequa felt the weight of responsibility settle over her like a mantle. She glanced at Nodin, seeing her own mix of determination and trepidation reflected in his eyes. Through their bond, she felt his unwavering support and love, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the meeting concluded, and they stepped back out into the fading light of evening, Sequa was struck by the sight before her. The gathering had evolved into an impromptu celebration, with bonfires blazing and the sounds of music and laughter filling the air. Shifters from both packs mingled freely, old rivalries set aside in the wake of their shared victory. Nodin's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her close. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Sequa nodded, leaning into his embrace. "It's beautiful. I never thought I'd see our packs come together like this." As they stood there, watching their people celebrate, Sequa felt a profound sense of rightness wash over her. This was what they had fought for, not just the survival of their world, but the chance for something better. A future where the barriers between packs could be broken down, where ancient rivalries could give way to new alliances. Nodin seemed to sense the direction of her thoughts. He turned to face her, his eyes shining with love and determination. "We can make this last, you know," he said softly. "This unity, this sense of shared purpose. It doesn't have to end when the celebration's over." Sequa smiled, reaching up to cup his cheek in her hand. "I know, and we will, together." As the moon rose over the valley, bathing the celebration in silver light, Sequa felt a sense of hope and possibility that she had never experienced before. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still threats to face, wounds to heal, and a new balance to be forged between the packs. But as she stood there in Nodin's arms, surrounded by the joyous sounds of their people, Sequa knew that they were equal to the task. Their journey had begun with a contract, a union forged by duty and tradition, but it had become something far greater, a partnership born of love, trust, and shared purpose. Whatever challenges the future held, whatever darkness might still lurk at the edges of their world, Sequa and Nodin would face it as they had faced the Hollow, together, stronger for their bond, and ready to lead their people into a new era of unity and strength. As the celebration continued around them, Sequa tilted her face up to meet Nodin's in a kiss that was both a promise and a new beginning. The moon smiled down upon them, its light a reminder of the ancient power that flowed through their veins and the sacred duty they now embraced. The contract that had brought them together was fulfilled, but their true journey, as mates, as leaders, as guardians of their world, was only just beginning. The weeks following their return from the Standing Stones were a whirlwind of activity, celebrations giving way to the sobering reality of rebuilding and preparing for an uncertain future. Sequa and Noden found themselves at the center of it all, their newfound status as heroes of the packs bringing with it a level of responsibility that was both exhilarating and daunting. One crisp autumn morning, about a month after their victory, Sequa stood on the balcony of the newly constructed Joint Pack Hall. The building, an impressive structure of stone and timber that blended seamlessly with the surrounding forest, was a physical representation of the new era of cooperation between the Moon Dancers and Storm Chasers. As she gazed out over the bustling activity in the clearing below, Sequa marveled at how much had changed in such a short time. Where once there had been clearly defined territories and wary interactions, now members of both packs moved freely, working side by side on various projects. She felt Noden's presence before he spoke, their bond humming with warmth as he approached. "Quite a view, isn't it?" he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. Sequa leaned back into his embrace, a smile tugging at her lips. "It's amazing," she agreed. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come." Noden chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I know what you mean. If someone had told me a few months ago that we'd be here, like this, I would have thought they were crazy." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching. As a group of young shifters, a mix of moon dancers and storm chasers, engaged in a playful sparring match under the watchful eye of Niabi. The fierce warrior had taken on the role of combat instructor for the next generation, her skills and experience proving invaluable in preparing them for whatever challenges might lie ahead. "We should probably head down," Noden said eventually, though he made no move to release her. "The council meeting will be starting soon." Sequa nodded, steeling herself for the task ahead. These joint council sessions, bringing together leaders from both packs to discuss everything from resource allocation to defense strategies, were crucial to maintaining their newfound unity. But they could also be contentious, old habits and prejudices sometimes flaring up despite everyone's best intentions. As they made their way down to the council chamber, Sequa felt a familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach. She and Noden had been thrust into leadership roles far sooner than either of them had expected, and there were days when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. Sensing her unease through their bond, Noden reached out to squeeze her hand reassuringly. "We've got this," he said softly. "Together. Remember?" Sequa smiled, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "Together," she agreed. The council chamber was already buzzing with activity when they entered. Elders Makia and Ahote sat at the head of the long table, their faces etched with the wisdom and weariness of leadership. Around them, representatives from both packs engaged in quiet conversation, the atmosphere tense but not hostile. As Sequa and Noden took their seats, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to them, a mix of respect, curiosity, and in some cases, lingering skepticism evident in the gathered faces. Elder Makia cleared her throat, calling the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. "We have much to discuss today, but first I believe Sequa and Noden have an update on the situation with our unexpected guest." Sequa took a deep breath, centering herself before speaking. "Thank you, Elder Makia. As most of you know, we've been working closely with Tasunka since his return from the Standing Stones. His recovery has been challenging, to say the least." A murmur ran through the gathered council members at the mention of Tasunka's name. The former Alpha's fate had been a topic of heated debate in the weeks following their return. Some had called for his execution, viewing him as too great a threat to be allowed to live. Others argued for mercy, pointing out that he had been as much a victim of the Hollow's corruption as anyone. In the end, it had been Sequa and Noden who had advocated most strongly for a middle path, containment and rehabilitation, with the hope that Tasunka's knowledge and experience could eventually be turned to the benefit of both packs. Nodin picked up the thread of the report, his voice steady and authoritative. Physically, Tasunka has recovered from the worst of the corruption, but mentally and emotionally, the scars run deep. He's been cooperative, providing us with valuable information about the Hollow and its influence, but he's also deeply traumatized by his experiences. Can he be trusted? The question came from a grizzled storm chaser elder, his tone skeptical. Sequa met the elder's gaze steadily. We believe so, yes. The purging of the Hollow's influence seems to have restored much of his original personality. He's expressed deep remorse for his actions and a desire to make amends. That said, Nodin added, we're proceeding with caution. Tasunka remains under constant guard, and his interactions with the general pack population are strictly limited and supervised. The discussion that followed was intense, with various council members weighing in with their concerns and suggestions. Sequa and Nodin fielded questions patiently, presenting a united front as they outlined their plans for Tasunka's continued rehabilitation and the safeguards in place to prevent any potential relapse. As the meeting progressed to other matters, trade agreements between the packs, the ongoing process of integrating their defensive patrols, plans for expanding their joint training programs, Sequa found herself marveling at how naturally she and Nodin worked together. Their bond allowed them to communicate silently, presenting a seamless front to the council, even when they didn't fully agree on every point. It was well past midday when the meeting finally adjourned. As the council members filed out, many, pausing to exchange a few words with Sequa and Nodin, Elder Makya approached them with a warm smile. You two continue to impress, she said, her eyes twinkling with pride. Your leadership has been instrumental in guiding us through these challenging times. Sequa felt a blush creep up her cheeks at the praise. We're just doing our best, she said modestly. There's still so much to learn. Elder Makya chuckled, patting Sequa's arm affectionately. And that humility is part of what makes you both such effective leaders. Never lose that willingness to learn and grow. As they left the council chamber, Sequa felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction settle over her. These meetings were draining, but the progress they were making, slowly but surely forging a true alliance between their packs, made it all worthwhile. What do you say we get out of here for a bit? Nodin suggested, a mischievous glint in his eye. I think we've earned a little break. Sequa grinned, already feeling her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin at the prospect of a run. Race you to the falls? She challenged, her voice playful. Without waiting for a response, she took off running, shifting mid-stride into Wei, her sleek silver wolf form. She heard Nodin's laugh behind her, quickly followed by the sound of paws hitting the earth as he gave chase. They ran through the forest, weaving between trees and leaping over fallen logs with the effortless grace of their wolf forms. Sequa reveled in the feeling of freedom, the wind in her fur and the rich sense of the forest filling her senses. Nodin kept pace beside her, his storm-gray form a blur of power and grace. Through their bond, Sequa could feel his joy and exhilaration mirroring her own. This was what it meant to be Shifter, the perfect balance of human intellect and animal instinct, at one with nature and each other. They reached the falls in what felt like no time at all, playfully nipping at each other as they skidded to a stop at the water's edge. Shifting back to human form, they collapsed onto the soft grass, breathless and laughing. I think it was a tie, Nodin panted, propping himself up on one elbow to look at Sequa. She grinned up at him, her hair wild and cheeks flushed from the run. If you say so, she teased. I'm pretty sure I had a nose ahead at the end there. Nodin's response was to lean down and capture her lips in a kiss that quickly deepened. Months of pent-up passion and the lingering adrenaline from their run fueling the heat between them. Sequa responded eagerly, her hands threading through his hair as she pulled him closer. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Sequa felt a wave of love and contentment wash over her. She reached up to trace the line of Nodin's jaw, marveling at how this arranged marriage had blossomed into something so profound and beautiful. I love you, she said softly, the words still new enough to send a thrill through her every time she spoke them. Nodin's eyes softened, his smile tender as he gazed down at her. "I love you too," he murmured. "More than I ever thought possible." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the falls, talking, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company away from the pressures of leadership. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Sequa found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, her head resting on Nodin's chest as they watched the sky change colors, "what would have happened if we hadn't been matched by the contract, if we had met some other way?" Nodin was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently playing with a strand of her hair. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I think about everything we've been through, how perfectly our strengths complement each other. And I can't help but feel like this was always meant to be. Contract or no contract." Sequa nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Their bond, forged in the crucible of duty and strengthened by shared trials and genuine love, felt like the most natural thing in the world, as if all the threads of fate and choice had woven together to bring them to this moment. As twilight deepened around them, Sequa reluctantly sat up. "We should probably head back," she said, though her tone made it clear she was in no hurry to leave their peaceful sanctuary. Nodin nodded, rising to his feet and offering her a hand up. "Duty calls," he agreed with a rueful smile. "But hey, at least we're facing it together, right?" Sequa grinned, leaning in to steal one more quick kiss before they began the journey back to the Packlands. "Always," she promised. As they made their way through the darkening forest, Sequa felt a sense of peace and purpose settle over her. The path ahead was still uncertain, fraught with challenges both known and unforeseen. The threat of the hollow lingered on the edges of their world, a reminder that their victory had been hard-won but potentially temporary. But with Nodin by her side, their bond a constant source of strength and comfort, Sequa felt ready to face whatever the future might hold. They had started as reluctant partners, bound by an ancient contract and the weight of their pack's expectations. But they had become so much more, true mates, partners in every sense of the word, and leaders of a new era for their people. As the lights of the joint pack hall came into view, Sequa squeezed Nodin's hand, feeling his answering pulse of love and support through their bond. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever darkness might still threaten their world, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, stronger for their bond, and ready to lead their people into a future bright with possibility. The contract that had brought them together was fulfilled, but their journey, as mates, as leaders, as guardians of their world, was only just beginning. And Sequa couldn't wait to see where it would lead them next. 5 years had passed since the fateful night at the Standing Stones, and the world of the shifters had changed in ways both profound and subtle. The joint pack hall, once a novelty, now stood as a symbol of the enduring alliance between the Moon Dancers and Storm Chasers. What had begun as a tenuous cooperation born of necessity had blossomed into a true integration of two cultures, stronger together than they had ever been apart. On this particular evening, the hall was alive with excitement and anticipation. Shifters from both packs as well as representatives from other allied groups had gathered for a momentous occasion, the official naming ceremony for Sequa and Nodin's firstborn child. Sequa stood at the center of the great hall, cradling her infant daughter in her arms. The baby, just 3 months old, had a shock of dark hair like her father, and eyes that seemed to shift color with her mood, sometimes storm gray, sometimes moon silver. Already, there were whispers about the potential power this child might wield, born of 2 such strong bloodlines. Nodin stood beside her, his presence a comforting warmth at her side. Through their bond, Sequa could feel his mix of pride, love, and just a touch of nervousness. This ceremony was more than just a naming. It was a statement of hope for the future, a symbol of the new era they were building together. As the assembled crowd fell silent, Elder Makia stepped forward. The years had bent her frame further, but her eyes were as sharp and wise as ever. "Friends, family, allies," she began, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "We gather tonight to welcome the newest member of our united packs, and to bestow upon her a name that will shape her destiny." Sequoia felt a swell of emotion as she gazed down at her daughter. They had debated long and hard over the name, wanting something that would honor both their heritages while also looking to the future. In the end, the choice had felt inevitable. Elder Makia turned to face Sequoia and Nodin, a warm smile on her weathered face. "Have you chosen a name for this child, born of moon and storm, guardian of the future?" Nodin nodded, his voice steady as he spoke the name they had chosen. "We have. We name her Aurora, for the lights that dance between earth and sky, bridging worlds as she bridges our bloodlines." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. The name was perfect, evocative of both the celestial power of the moon dancers and the atmospheric might of the storm chasers. Elder Makia nodded solemnly, then raised her hands to the assembled crowd. "Then let it be known from this day forward that this child shall be called Aurora, daughter of moon and storm, hope of the united Pax." A cheer went up from the gathered shifters, the sound swelling until it seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. Little Aurora, startled by the noise, began to fuss in Sequoia's arms. But as Sequoia gently soothed her, she felt a pulse of something, a flicker of power that seemed to emanate from the child, briefly illuminating her skin with a soft, aurora-like glow. Sequoia's eyes met Nodin's, and she knew he had felt it too. Their daughter was special, perhaps even more so than they had imagined. The responsibility of guiding her, of preparing her for whatever role she might play in the future of their world, felt suddenly overwhelming. As if sensing her sudden anxiety, Nodin wrapped an arm around Sequoia's waist, pulling her and Aurora close. "Together," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "We'll face it all together." Sequoia nodded, letting his steady presence calm her racing thoughts. Yes, the path ahead was uncertain, but they had each other, and now they had Aurora. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them as a family. The ceremony transitioned into a celebration, with food and music and joyous reunions between friends and allies. As Sequoia made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and allowing Aurora to be cooed over by seemingly everyone, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. She thought of that night under the harvest moon, when she and Nodin had first been bound by the contract. How distant that memory seemed now, how much they had both changed and grown. The arranged marriage that had once felt like a prison sentence had become the foundation of a love and partnership deeper than anything she could have imagined. Her musings were interrupted by the approach of a familiar face. Loka, looking healthier and more at peace than she had seen him in years. So, trauma of his corruption had left deep scars, but with time and the unwavering support of his pack, he had slowly healed. "She's beautiful," Loka said, smiling down at Aurora. "A perfect blend of both of you." Sequoia beamed with pride. "Thank you, Loka. We think so too." She studied her friend's face, noting the calm that had replaced the haunted look he had worn for so long. "How are you doing? I heard your last mission was a success." Loka nodded, a hint of his old confidence shining through. In the years since the battle at the Standing Stones, he had become an invaluable member of their efforts to track and neutralize any lingering corruption from the Hollow's influence. His personal experience with the darkness made him uniquely suited to the task. "We managed to cleanse another node," he confirmed. "The seal is holding strong, and we haven't seen any signs of new incursions. But..." He hesitated, his expression growing serious. "There's always more work to be done. The Hollow may be contained, but it's not gone. Not entirely." Sequoia nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. The victory they had won 5 years ago had been significant, but it wasn't final. The threat of the Hollow lingered, a shadow at the edges of their world that required constant vigilance. "We'll keep fighting," she said firmly. "For Aurora, for all our children. We'll make sure they inherit a world free from that darkness." Loka's smile returned, tinged with determination. "With leaders like you and Nodin and little ones like this to inspire us, I believe we will." As Loka moved on to mingle with other guests, Sequoia felt a familiar presence approaching. She turned to see Helena, her mother, making her way through the crowd. The years since her return had been a process of healing and reconnection, rebuilding, the bond that had been strained by her long absence. "My dear," Helena said warmly, embracing Sequoia carefully to avoid disturbing Aurora. "She's absolutely perfect." Sequoia leaned into her mother's embrace, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. "Thank you, Mom. I wish Dad could have been here to see her." Helena's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she nodded. "He would have been so proud, Sequoia, of Aurora, of you, of everything you've accomplished." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts of the man who had been taken from them too soon. Sequoia's father had fallen, defending their territory from a rogue attack just months before the events at the Standing Stones. His loss had been a driving force in Sequoia's determination to forge a lasting peace between the packs. "He is here, you know," Helena said softly, her gaze distant. "In spirit, in the legacy he left through you. And now, in her." She gently stroked Aurora's cheek, eliciting a happy gurgle from the infant. Sequoia felt a lump form in her throat, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. "I hope I can live up to that legacy," she whispered. "That I can be the leader our people need and the mother Aurora deserves." Helena's eyes refocused on Sequoia, filled with pride and unwavering faith. "You already are, my dear. Every day, with every decision you make, you honor your father's memory and forge a new path for our people. And as for being a mother," she smiled, glancing over Sequoia's shoulder. "Well, you have an excellent partner to share that journey with." Sequoia turned to see Nodin approaching, his face lighting up as he caught sight of his wife and daughter. As he joined them, wrapping an arm around Sequoia's waist and pressing a gentle kiss to Aurora's forehead, Sequoia felt a sense of completeness wash over her. This was her family, not just Nodin and Aurora, but her mother, Loka, the entirety of both packs now united as one. The bonds between them, forged through trials and triumph, were stronger than any contract could ever be. As the celebration continued around them, Sequoia found herself drawn to the large windows overlooking the forest. The full moon hung low in the sky, bathing the world in silver light. But there, dancing at the edges of the horizon, were the first, shimmering tendrils of an aurora, ribbons of green and purple light weaving across the stars. "Look," she whispered, nodding towards the window. Nodin and Helena followed her gaze, their eyes widening at the celestial display. "It's beautiful," Nodin murmured, his arm tightening around Sequoia. "Just like our little one." As they watched, Aurora stirred in Sequoia's arms, her eyes opening to reveal that shifting mix of silver and gray. She gazed up at the sky, and for a moment Sequoia could have sworn she saw the lights of the aurora reflected in her daughter's eyes. In that moment, a vision flashed through Sequoia's mind, glimpses of a possible future. Aurora, grown into a powerful young woman, standing at the center of a great circle of shifters from all packs, her hands raised, channeling a power that bridged not just moon and storm, but all the elemental forces of their world. A new kind of guardian, born of unity and hope, standing against whatever darkness might threaten their world. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Sequoia breathless. She looked at Nodin, seeing in his eyes that he had shared the experience through their bond. "Did you see?" she began, her voice hushed with awe. Nodin nodded, a mix of pride and determination in his expression. "I did. It's not set in stone, but it's a possibility. A future we can work towards." Sequoia looked down at Aurora, now contentedly drifting back to sleep, blissfully unaware of the potential destiny that lay before her. The weight of responsibility settled over Sequoia once more, but this time it felt less like a burden and more like a calling. "Whatever comes," she said softly, "we'll be ready. We'll guide her, prepare her, but we'll also let her forge her own path." Nodin pressed a gentle kiss to Sequoia's temple. "Of course we will. That's what parents do, isn't it? Give our children roots to ground them and wings to help them soar." Helena smiled at the young couple, her eyes shining with pride and just a hint of knowing wisdom. "You'll do wonderfully," she assured them. "Both of you. The future of our peoples, of all people, is bright with the two of you leading the way." As the night wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Sequoia found herself filled with a sense of hope and purpose stronger than any she had felt before. The journey that had begun with a reluctant contract signing had led her here, to a love deeper than she had ever imagined, to a position of leadership she had never sought but now embraced fully, and to a future bright with possibility. The hollow still lurked at the edges of their world, a reminder that the fight was not over. But as Sequoia looked around at her gathered family and friends, at the united packs working and celebrating together, she knew that they were stronger than any darkness. They were the guardians of a new era, protectors of a fragile peace and a growing unity. And in Aurora, in all the children of this new alliance, lay the seeds of a future where the barriers between packs, between shifters and humans, between worlds, might finally be broken down for good. As the aurora continued to dance across the night sky, Sequoia held her daughter close, Nodin's arm warm and steady around them both. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever trials they might face, they would meet them as they had met every obstacle so far, together, bound not by contract, but by choice, by love and by an unwavering commitment to the light. The moon smiled down upon them, its ancient light a reminder of the power that flowed through their veins and the sacred duty they now embraced. The contract that had brought them together was long fulfilled, but their journey, as mates, as parents, as leaders, as guardians of their ever-evolving world, was only just beginning. And as Sequoia gazed out at the shimmering lights in the sky, her daughter cradled in her arms and her mate by her side, she knew that this was more than just an ending. It was a new beginning, full of hope and possibility, stretching out before them like the infinite expanse of the star-filled sky. The legacy of the moon dancers and storm chasers would live on, not in separation and ancient rivalries, but in unity, in love, and in the promise of a future as bright and beautiful as the aurora that danced across the heavens.